the prophet Isaiah is both a great prophet and a great poet. This passage is actually centrally important in this season. First of all, we have that prophecy regarding the forerunner. A voice cries, "Prepare in the wilderness a way for the Lord, make a straight highway for our God across the desert." But then we have this passage, which in the old premonstratensian rite that we still used in the monastery when I was ordained in Italy, is put to a solemn tone only once a year and is sung at midnight at Christmas, because classically the vigils, the matins of Christmas, is public and solemn, and so it was. Long, meditative, cold, because the church was not heated, but very much the voice of the Middle Ages. And this passage, which I'm about to quote, was sung solemnly on that one occasion in the year, in Latin. "A voice commands, 'Cry,' and I answered, 'What shall I cry?' All flesh is grass, and its beauty like the wild flowers. The grass withers, the flower fades, when the breath of the Lord blows on them," and on it goes. And it was deliberately put there from time immemorial, precisely reminding us before the outbreak of light at midnight of the darkness of the centuries of waiting and the fundamental condition of human poverty, grass, withering. Where I live, I have just behind me New Grange, where that is very much the tone, the dark. In fact, in a few days' time, that will be very much the point of people coming from a long way to try to catch the sun on the 21st of December. You know why. So, fighting against the dark. 500 years before the pyramids. It's a long time in human history. The light of the gospel. Now, it's also something that we need to remind ourselves of constantly. For instance, when these great seasons come and go, they are meant there for a reason. Advent works on two levels. The immediate preparation, but also the ultimate one for the advent of the great King. And therefore it places us precisely in our own context. Limitedness. Essentially weakness before what we're facing. We're not in control. We're here for only a limited time, and the big picture is not yet seen. We forget that. And we forget it partly because we're meant to forget it. Because the enemy of our soul wants us to forget it. And his great ploy is to make sure that we're distracted all the time. In the monastic life, it's not quite like that, because classically there aren't all those distractions, and one hears time passing. In fact, in France, where I was formed, we had on the bell that would ring every quarter of an hour and also in between, on the bell itself, an old bell, this inscribed in the bell itself, in Latin, this very verse, "Quid clamabo?" What shall I cry? The bell was asking, what is the meaning of my chime? And on the same bell, the answer was given, namely the verse that follows, "Omne fenum," or rather, "Omne caro, omnis caro fenum." All flesh is grass, or hay, whatever you want to call it. And it goes on also in the words that follow. And so, we who knew what was written on the bell, every time we heard the bell calling, were also reminded of that. It was 1/4 of an hour, 1/2 hour, 1/3, 1 hour closer to what? Well, the bell was standing over the cloister garth. And every time one went from the cell to the church, one went round at least a part of the cloister garth, because the monastery is always with 4 cloisters. a complete square, and in the midst are the brethren who have gone before us. And there they were, and occasionally one of the brethren would die, and we would bury him in the monastic way without a coffin. You'd see him go under, and the earth was put directly on him. And of course, they would watch him until he died. He was well cared for. And it wasn't an unhappy occasion, it was ultimate victory. He had conquered time. He had conquered the world. But then, in the eyes of the world, he was forgotten. Indeed, in our monastery, we had the classical observance of not putting a name on the grave. It was a simple black cross for each one, including the prior, no name or date, as forgotten in death as they are in life. Amongst the brethren, they knew who was under each cross, at least the most recent, and that's all they were. No noise, no limelight, no appearance on the television, and should they ever appear in a book, which was rare, it had to be without a name. Should they ever appear on a picture, it had to be under the hood, without the face being seen. That was the classical discipline. And so, that was all the world knew of them. Zero. But boy, was there a difference, I'm sure, when they got to the other side, compared with many a noisy soul on this side, who is the centre of attention. I want to make a jump, because we're talking here about the real issue, using time to get to where we're meant to, and in the way that we're meant to, because we only have one innings. These who took a radical choice knew what they wanted and took the means to get there. It's also the case of those that we feast in the calendar. Today, St. Nicholas. We know from ancient tradition that he was, from early life, orientated towards prayer. He spent a while in a monastic state in the Holy Land, not far from Bethlehem. He eventually found his way back to his home area, Myra, in Asia Minor, and he became bishop of that place. He was present at the Council of Nicaea, and on the document that has come down to us from the Council Fathers, as early as 325, which is the one called by Constantine, who had made of Christianity the beginnings of an official religion, and they had to sort out the Arians, who were denying the fullness of the divinity of Christ, and he called this council to the place which was fairly important in the eastern part of the empire especially, Nicaea, 325, and this bishop, it says in the document, Nikolaos Episkopos Mire in Lycia. In Lycia, he was bishop of that place in Lycia, in Asia Minor. It's the very same, therefore, and he is the 151st person to have left his signature on the document of bishops present. So he is a historic figure. He died, and from his body came out a miraculous oozing of oil, which did miracles, so much so that he was called the wonder worker. Hagios Nikolaos or Taumaturgos, the thaumaturge. He did miracles all the time. Hence, very popular in the East straight away. With time, that popularity grew, and it reached also the West. There was, however, a delicate point in history, so much so that for a while the Sultan conquered an insufficiently armed emperor, Christian emperor, and won a certain terrain, including that Myra area. And so there was a danger. Eventually they had a second battle, and the Christian forces got back a part, at least, of the terrain. But it was unstable, and in 1087 a band of Christian heroes determined to rescue this holy relic, the body of St. Nicholas, from ultimate danger. And one tradition says that they were told to do so by a dream or a vision by the saint himself, because the foreknowledge of the saints is such that they know when actually something is going to happen which concerns their body, it would seem. And anyway, this happened, and the body, at least half of it, but the main part of it, was retrieved and got out of that dangerous area which was coming under Islamic control, present-day Turkey, and it was got to a port area, Bari, in the south of Italy. And there it is to this day, very much venerated. And there's a Roman Catholic church right next to it, and also right next to it on the other side a Greek Orthodox church, because Magna Graecia, the south of Italy, was the Great Greece, and there was a very strong influence of the Greek culture there. And actually, the last monastery founded before the separation is still of Eastern Rite, as well as the Western Chapel. It's the monastery of St. Nilus in Grottaferrata, south of Rome. That was founded at about 1081, before the split in 1084. And it's still of Eastern Rite to this day, under the Pope. So in the south of Italy, that's a very important place on this day, Bari. And the miracle never stopped, to the delight of those who had taken it at their own risk to safety. The oil still comes out to this day and goes round, especially that part of the world, and produces miracle. It's rather like what happens still to this day with the body of St. Charbel Maklouf in the Lebanon, closer to us in time. But I want to go into one specific area. It's his link with Russia, of whom he is the patron, and very much venerated. Some years ago, still during the communist regime, there was a bus full of people trundling along a rough road. And at a certain point, one gentleman in this bus noticed somebody hadn't noticed before earlier on in the journey. It was a venerable bearded man sitting next to him. And he just started some kind of conversation with this gentleman, who looked quite venerable. The point came very quickly to the question of religion, for which this indoctrinated communist had little time. The venerable old man was quite serene, not impressed by his arguments. Let him talk nevertheless. But he did say, the end of Satan's reign over this land is coming to an end shortly. Now remember, Russia was the most mystical country on earth, La Sainte Russe, Holy Russia. And eventually something happened on the bus. At a certain point there was this almighty bang! Yes, it had that exact effect. And it had also this effect. The gentleman with the beard looked to his man and said, "Did you notice at that point every single person on the bus made 3 times the sign of the cross?" At that he disappeared. They all realized that for Hagios Nikolaos, he had appeared on the bus as the protector of Russia, giving this consoling message that it was coming to an end. Some years ago, I was at a charismatic conference in Wales, the annual one, in Carmarthen. We had great speakers, and towards the end of the culminating Mass, we had a great speaker. We entered into mode after Holy Communion, and he had this from the Lord. He was trying, having preached on Russia at the very moment at which things were happening, 1989, he was praying for mercy for the souls of Lenin and Stalin. There was an intense pause and wait. We were all, just after Holy Communion, very much engaged with heaven, and heaven was close to us at the very moment when history was making itself, just behind the Iron Curtain. and this came back, but they were in a completely different realm and quite unreachable. In other words, it would seem they were lost. But that is not all. We were given to understand that things had been going on before that moment at which all was actually collapsing. There had been a lot of hidden stuff going on in the Lord, e.g., Catholic priest going around all the Kremlin complex, I don't know how many times, with the Blessed Sacrament secretly, and so on and so forth. Gorbachev, Mikhail, he had, of course, the name of Michael. We know that the present President, Vladimir, is of a personal and convinced faith. We also know other things, that he is responsible for reopening a vast number of museums, which are actually churches, taken over by the enemy of mankind. You know who. We also know that he does not tolerate certain things, like blasphemy, officially staged. We also know this, that in 2009, the Turkish government decided to take away the magnificent bronze statue of St. Nicholas, which the Russian government itself had commissioned from a high-profile sculptor in Russia and sent to the place of ancient veneration of St. Nicholas. There's still a part of him there, at Myra, to be placed there in public. That was in the year 2000. So in 2009, out of political correctness, the Turkish government decided to take it away discreetly and put in its place a representation which would be more acceptable to current society. The modern equivalent of St. Nicholas is Claus. Now, the way in which the word is corrupted to Santa Claus, because Santa is actually more of a Latin root. Claus is evident, that's Nicholas, still Claus in German. But the other part, Svinter, that would actually be the equivalent of the Romanian, Ukrainian, that kind of language. So it would make sense. But Russia heard about it, and the government itself would not have it. And so on the highest level, between the two governments, he had to come back. He's there, closer to the church, but Santa Claus is not. So Russia compares very well with RTE, if not far better. And it is right now a lesson unto mankind. If one looks at the way that Russia now honours Christ publicly, for instance at Easter, where the holy light comes from the Holy Sepulchre, lit by the finger of God on Holy Saturday, as you probably know. It comes in the airlines and it goes to all the main patriarchates. It comes also to Dublin, it comes to the Greek church. And anyway, it comes around, and there, solemnly, it's taken to the cathedral in Moscow. And there, of course, the patriarch hands it over to the head of the Russian state, who is not ashamed to sing in joy with all the people of God there, Christos Voskresi, Christos Voskresi, Christ is risen. That, my friends, is the one that we're honouring, not Santa Claus.
Are we